what's up? I'm Patrick Jagir, the Cosmic Alchemist. Welcome to this video. This is a video I've wanted to make for at least a year, and it's taken some time to come together. There's a lot of moving pieces to it, and creativity and inspiration are not always on demand for exactly what you want to do. And a lot of events in my life and in the world have got me thinking about this stuff, and really helped to solidify what I've wanted to say about this topic. So anyway, the topic for this video is Ragnarok. So Ragnarok is something that it's a word that's been going around in literature and pop culture to a lesser extent, but it's been used in movies, video games, novels, graphic novels, you name it. So where it's recently got visibility is in the Marvel universe. So in the Thor movies, the movie was Thor Ragnarok, with Chris Hemsworth playing Thor and Anthony Hopkins as Odin, and then you had Cate Blanchett playing the goddess Hel. I thought she did a really good job. That plot deviated from the traditional mythology, but I really enjoyed it. And it illustrated, really what the theme of Ragnarok is. So anyway, Ragnarok is really usually recognized, by people who, haven't had the time to study this stuff or, are not familiar with it. It's recognized as kind of the final battle and the end of the world, and it's this huge destructive event. And, it's only partially true. And what Ragnarok really is it's the end of a cycle in the beginning of another cycle. And this works on all different levels because mythology works on all different levels. It's timeless, and it's about how themes in our lives, in our personal lives, and then in the lives of communities and countries and even the whole world. It's about how these themes come and go in cycles. And really time is circular because the earth goes around the sun and the sun goes around the galaxy, and eventually you come back to where you were in the previous cycle. So time is a circular thing, even though we learn time as a straight line with a bunch of historical facts that we have to memorize to pass a test. It's really a circular phenomenon. So Ragnarok works on all these different levels. It can be personal, it can be community, it can be global, or really even bigger than that. And so it's not strictly a destruction event. It's the end of one time period or one cycle and the beginning of a new one. So, this can manifest in someone's life as like a mental or an emotional breakdown, or just the end of a period in your life, the end of one career and the start of another, or the end of a relationship and the start of another. It can be a really small event, or it can be huge. So, and this happens, empires rise and fall, and, and belief systems rise and fall. And really, in our human world, belief systems are at the heart of everything, because belief systems are built on assumptions, and we have to have assumptions so that we can work together and cooperate as groups. We have to have, we have to agree that certain things are a certain way so that we can build more complicated belief systems on top of those so we can get things done. So our assumptions build our belief systems, and the belief systems build your whole world and your whole life, because they determine how you react to other people, how you react to yourself, and how you react to your environment and situations in it. And for a long time, certain belief systems can prevail, but they can't prevail forever. And you see this in empires want to last forever, and religions want to last forever, but they only have so much time in them, because belief systems eventually they become outdated, they become obsolete, they become impractical. And I respect tradition a lot, but for me, tradition has to be relevant, and it has to be practical and usable. Otherwise, it's dogma, and you're just doing it for vanity, or you're doing it because you fear what would happen if you stopped doing it. So that's really the underlying theme here with this topic of Ragnarok. It's all about belief systems that no longer serve us coming to an end, but then more importantly, the rebirth that happens after that, where we revamp our belief systems and we tailor them to the world and the times we live in. And, I'm definitely of the mindset where you take the traditional beliefs and the traditional knowledge that still makes sense and is still relevant, and you build it into the new belief systems. I'm not, the kind of person that just wants to burn the world to the ground and start over, because it doesn't make sense, because there's a lot that comes down through the ages that's timeless, and that works for us and that serves us very well. So, and I'm making this video because we're at one of these times as Americans, as Westerners, and just even as human beings on planet Earth, where we're at one of these Ragnarok moments. And the whole thing with Ragnarok here is that you can flow graciously with the times and just accept that, a certain amount of change is inevitable, or you can fight it kicking and screaming, and you can have this big destructive event, and you may or may not come out on the other side of it. And that's an interesting thing about the Ragnarok myth, is this whole final battle happens, and most of the cast of characters ends up mutually destroying each other, but then the survivors, they're in the new Asgard, and it's like the new heaven, in the book of Revelations in the Bible. And really, the book of Revelations was, plagiarized on these end times and rebirth stories that already existed around the world. And I don't say plagiarism in a negative way, but, all religions do this. They take existing stories and they change them and rewrite them to fit their new religion. And this is what the Christians did with this sort of Ragnarok type story, which every culture had one of them. So anyway, at the end of this myth, the end of this Ragnarok myth, the gods who survived and are living in this new heaven and new earth, they talk about what happened in the previous cycle leading up to Ragnarok. And they ask each other, could it have been avoided? And my answer is absolutely yes, because when you read the myths, there are all these clues that this whole thing could have been avoided. And so, to keep this in summary before I get into the details, what really happened and what brought Ragnarok on in these myths is that the gods got too self-righteous, and they got too wrapped up in their own point of view, and they didn't see anyone else's point of view. And they felt threatened by people who they insisted, or beings they insisted on seeing as enemies, and they refused to see the point of view of those other beings or those other people, and they treated them as threats. And so they made enemies of other people and other beings who may have been friends and may have cooperated with them if they were willing to, kind of stand in someone else's shoes and see from their perspective. So, and that's what brings Ragnarok on, and Ragnarok is, it absolutely has a lot of psychological and emotional relevance, because, what happens throughout all these stories is that the gods will see a being as a threat, and rather than cooperate with it and be friends with it, they'll punish it. They'll tie it up and confine it, and beat it up. And eventually they break out of this confinement and they cause all kinds of chaos. So, we do this on different levels. We do this to ourselves. We get in denial about things. We don't want to feel the way we're feeling, so we deny our feelings. We stuff it down into our subconscious, into our unconscious, and we act like everything's great. But eventually, all these thoughts and these emotions and these feelings that we considered too negative to acknowledge and feel and deal with, and too uncomfortable, they end up roaring out of our unconscious and out of our subconscious, and it causes all this chaos in our lives, and we have, sort of catastrophic events in our lives. We do self-destructive things, we lose jobs, relationships fall apart, you name it. We lose it all on some level. But it's because we sabotage ourselves, and our points of view were too rigid and too inflexible. And that's the thing is, in these myths, the gods who are at their twilight, who are destroyed in Ragnarok, they're the Aesir, so they're the celestial gods. And, in Norse myth, you have, or in all myth really, in Vedic myths, everywhere in the world, you have celestial gods and terrestrial ones. So the celestial gods live in the heavens, and they're the planets and the stars. And they're above and they're away from the flow of time. So they're kind of like children, because they're very powerful and aware, but they're not wise because they don't go through the flow of time on Earth. Whereas the terrestrial gods, instead of being like children, they're more like grandparents, because they feel time ticking away and they see the changes in the Earth. So these Aesir, these celestial gods who fight in this battle of Ragnarok, they're kind of like children, and they're obsessed with purity, and they're obsessed with getting their way, and they're obsessed with just having it their way all the time, and they're very quick to get into conflict and to fight. They're less inclined to work things out. So why this is relevant is that we're living this right now, and like I'm always saying, here in America and here in the West, extremism is mainstream. You have this debacle and this drama of left versus right politics, where there are only 2 points of view that are possible, and everyone's at each other's throats, and we're getting to the point where people of different parties call each other the enemy, and it's like, no, they're your fellow citizens. You can't be calling these people the enemy. Part of that is we live comfortable lives here, and we don't really know what an enemy is, but we're making enemies of people who we shouldn't consider as such. So the more we do this, and the other thing is too is, with these two sides, whatever side I choose or that anyone chooses is always the holy and righteous and the right and the good side, and the other side is always the evil and the bad and the mindless and the stupid side. And both sides think this of each other. They each think they're the good side. So that's not really true. How is that possible, that in the whole universe there are only 2 possible sides? So the big challenge here with this whole theme of Ragnarok and this occurrence of it, whether it's on a personal level, community level, national level, or even global, is that it's kind of a mental trap. And this is because quickly, to summarize here, basically Ragnarok, you have the gods, the higher consciousness versus forces of nature, and the armies of the underworld of hell, the unconscious. You have these 2 forces opposing each other and kind of mutually destroying each other. And so people read this and they take it literally, just like they read the book of Revelation and take it literally. They read it, they take it literally, and then they're on the lookout. And they're on the lookout for, in the case of Ragnarok, they're on the lookout for, just these mindless beings of destruction and, greed and, just mindless chaos and destruction. And anyone who doesn't agree with us, we accuse of being, those forces of destruction and of mindlessness. People do this when they read the book of Revelation. They're on the lookout for the Antichrist, any president they don't like is automatically the Antichrist, and anyone that doesn't agree with their values is evil and satanic, and this is people who take it extreme. So what happens is, and when we read these quote unquote end times story, we always think that we're on the holy and righteous side, and that the other side that disagrees with us is the side of chaos and destruction and mindlessness. Well, this mental trap that I'm talking about is that both sides always see each other as the good side and the holy and righteous side, and they see the side that disagrees with them. We see the side that disagrees with us as the chaotic, destructive, mindless side. So, that's inevitable. In times like this, Iron Age, end of the Iron Age, end of the Kali Yuga, we're not going to see the gods literally come out. We're not going to see divine beings come out and do their thing and wage this, this dramatic theatrical conflict. You're not going to see angels blowing trumpets and Jesus with a sword coming out of his mouth and 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. It's symbolic, and it's going to be acted out through human beings. But you're always going to think that you're on the holy and righteous and the good side, and that the other side is always the evil and chaotic and destructive and mindless side. So don't go there. Put yourself in other people's shoes and see their perspectives, and get rid of this whole idea that there's only 2 perspectives and that there has to be some final battle between them. And so again, I want to reiterate this whole point about this mental trap that Ragnarok is, at least in these times where we're ending the Iron Age, this Kali Yuga of extreme materialist consciousness and low spiritual consciousness. We're never going to see these stories playing out literally, whether you're talking about Ragnarok or the Book of Revelations. You're not going to see the divine beings doing their thing. You're not going to see Thor and the serpent fighting, or Odin and the Fenris wolf, or you're not going to see a zombie army out of the underworld, and then you're not going to see Jesus with a sword coming out of his mouth, or angels blowing trumpets, or 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, or 7-headed beasts. You're going to see these archetypes, these mythological archetypes, which are psychological complexes and programs. You're going to see them being acted out by people. But, you're going to see people on the other side acting out and being these forces of evil and destruction and chaos and mindlessness. You're going to see them act that out. They're going to see you being those forces too. Everyone is going to accuse everyone of being the forces of mindlessness and hate and evil and destruction and chaos. And everyone's going to think that they're on the good and holy and righteous side. And that's just not true. Nobody has a monopoly on it. No party has a monopoly on it. And I've seen this for years in the spiritual community, where people, they think, well, this religion's the spiritual one. This political party is the party of spiritual people. It's like nobody has a monopoly. And everyone sees each other as evil, and they see themselves as good. It's always been this way. People, especially in the 20th century, which is, the culmination of the Age of Pisces and of the Iron Age. Especially like in the world wars, you had chaplains on both sides telling people they're on the good side, and God wants you to kill those people, and you're doing the right thing. It's like nobody has a monopoly on it. It's a human war that could be avoided if we weren't so self-righteous and self-absorbed and stuck in our own perspective. So, that's the deal with that. So, but that's the mental trap we're stuck in. So, and the more we do this, the closer we get to some final battle event. The possibility of actual violence in our own country becomes more and more possible. You know, we get closer to it every day that we insist on doing this. So really, both sides politically and even religions do this, you know, especially Christianity and Islam, you know, they're fast growing and they're huge businesses. So between the religions, the politics, the whole thing, special interest groups in this country, everything's a special interest group. They all want to have a smug victory, and they all want to tell their supposed enemies, "I told you so." And you know, that's a big theme here with Ragnarok, is that everybody loses in Ragnarok. Nobody gets their smug victory. No one gets to say, "I told you so," because all of their belief systems come crashing down, and they experience tragedy and destructive events, and there is no "I told you so," and there is no smug victory. Everybody who loses, who insists upon getting in this dualist us versus them concept and mindset. So that's really my message here, is we're in one of these times where, you know, we can come down to some sort of final battle, but nobody's gonna win. You know, nobody's gonna win and bring back the good old days and, you know, reshape the country or the world exactly as they want it and tell everyone who disagreed, "I told you so." That's not gonna happen. You know, that's a very, you know, extremist view. And with all this stuff going on in Sagittarius lately, you know, here in the summer of 2019, you know, the lunar eclipse in Sagittarius, Saturn, Ketu, and Pluto in Sagittarius, and then the solar eclipse that's going to happen in December 2019 in Sagittarius. It's all about trying to help us get over this self-righteousness and this extremism, and really, you know, being self-absorbed and insisting that our point of view is the right one and anyone who disagrees is wrong. So we need to get over this, or we're going to experience a Ragnarok event. You know, and Ragnaroks happen all the time. They happen in small ways to people in their personal lives. They happen when countries and empires fall, you know, economic collapses, things like that. And a lot of these things are possible for us, you know, in America and in the West here in 2019 and 2020 and, you know, up through 2025 and a little beyond. If we insist on keeping up this mindset, then our belief systems are going to be torn from us. And like I said, it's time for us to change our belief systems. You know, the Age of Pisces was all about just pick a side, pick one of two sides. You better pick the right one, and we're going to punish the other side for not agreeing with us. So that's over. We're moving into Aquarius, and Aquarius is about being an individual, but balancing it with cooperating with others. So in the Age of Aquarius, there are infinite viewpoints. There are infinite perspectives, and they're all valid. So, you know, we have to get on board here, or we're going to experience some tragedy. And, you know, the astrology shows potential for it. So that's why I'm making this. You know, and, you know, we've got this, you know, one of the big events right now is this whole Iran thing. And, you know, it looks like it's leading up to a war. And, you know, I have a lot of friends who are in the military, or they're reservists, or they're retired. And, you know, some don't want anything to happen, and some do want a war to happen, and some are, you know, some are saying it's a bad thing, some are saying it's a good thing, you know, and they even welcome it. And, you know, I see where everyone's coming from. And, you know, even the people I disagree with, I see where they're coming from, because as military people, their purpose in life has been to protect their country and people they care about. So I understand where they're coming from. And, you know, big thing for me is I don't want to see anybody get hurt needlessly, because I think this whole situation is all about, it's about two sides that are totally inflexible and self-righteous, really. And they refuse to see things from the other person's point of view. And so if they keep doing this, then there's going to be some kind of a bash up. I don't think this year, but we're leading up to something in 2025, so I'm hoping we can avoid this. So anyway, let's look at this in some more detail. So that's kind of the summary, if you don't want to stick around for a longer video. Now let's get into Ragnarok itself, and let's take this apart. So Ragnarok has these two main sides, and on one side you have the gods of Asgard, who are called the Aesir, so the celestial gods, and then you have a few terrestrial gods. You know, the one that's really mentioned is Frey, so the god of the harvest. He's a fertility god. And so you have him, you have the Aesir, you know, most of the Aesir, and then you have the Einherjar. So the Einherjar are the honorable dead, so the mortals, the humans that have died and gone to Valhalla. And then on the other side you have Loki, the trickster god, who is leading the armies of the underworld, the armies of hell, who directly fight against the humans who've died and gone to Valhalla. And then you have the frost giants, and then you have Surt, who's kind of like a Balrog. He's like a fire being, you know, like the Balrog from the Lord of the Rings. And he has a whole army of fire beings that follow him, and they're from the fire world called Muspel, you know, in the Norse mythology. And then you have the children of Loki. So you have Fenrir, the Fenris wolf. He's this giant wolf, you know, unimaginably huge, who eats the sun and the moon. And then you have Jormungand, who is the Midgard serpent, the world serpent, who is said to encircle the entire world. And, you know, it's this symbol you see where it's a serpent, you know, kind of eating its own tail, circling the earth. So these basic two sides go off and face each other. So the setting for this whole thing is, you know, in the myth it talks about, you know, there'll be a time in the future when, you know, humans are basically almost entirely materialistic. Spirituality is at an all-time low, and you know, there's still religion, but it's a big show, and it's kind of a, you know, it's like a social club. You know, it's like joining a fraternity. You know, you're guaranteed to have friends. So, you know, it's this time when people are also just, they're at each other's throats. You know, it talks about brothers against brothers and sisters against sisters, and, you know, siblings, children fighting each other, and, you know, parents and children betraying each other and undermining each other and fighting against each other. So it's a time on earth where people are really greedy, and there's hardly any loyalty, and people are just out for themselves, and they're out to acquire more material goods, and there's not much of a spiritual consciousness to be spoken of. And you have things going on. It talks about, like, you know, the sea starts to get poisoned by the venom of the world serpent Jormungand, and there's mass fish die-offs and bird die-offs, and you know, and there's even, they talk about the climate changing. So they talk about the seas rising, you know, water, ice melting and seas rising. So, and then the rhythm of the weather is off too. You know, you have the Thimble winter, where you have 3 winters straight, you know, with a lukewarm summer basically and no spring. So, you know, things on earth are definitely awry. And during this time, when this is all going on, the gods are sleeping. And so the only god who remains awake is Heimdall, the watchman. And when he sees the trickster Loki break out of his prison under the earth, and he sees Fenris break out of his prison, the Fenris wolf, and when he sees the Midgard serpent coming onto land, and then the armies of the dead, the armies of hell, the underworld, come forth to march against the gods, and the frost giants do the same, and the fire beings do the same. He blows his horn, the Gjallar horn, and the gods wake up and they scramble the army of the humans in Valhalla, and they do this battle, and basically all of these opposing forces eliminate each other. And so, what you have here is the different gods and these different beings and these different armies symbolize different things, and they sort of conduct this mutual destruction of one another. And so, at the end of it all, a few of the gods live. You have the sons of Thor, Modi and Magni, and then the sons of Odin. You have Vidar and Vali. A bunch of the goddesses survive, and then a pair of humans, and they all take refuge in the world tree, the tree of life, and then the last being surviving on the battlefield, that stays on the battlefield, where after the survivors have fled to the world tree, is the fire being Surt, like this fire demon. And what he does is he burns the surface of the earth, and then the ice melts, and then the floodwaters come and basically cleanse the earth after it's burned. And then there's a new earth, there's a new heaven, or aka a new Asgard. It's called Idavol, and it basically means like the plane of splendor. So it's like the new earth and the new heaven out of the book of Revelations. That's where they got the idea for the book of Revelations, of the new heaven and new earth, after the whole Armageddon thing. So the earth floods and it's cleansed, and then the waters recede, and then the earth springs forth again. The earth comes back to life, and it's more vibrant than it was before. And then there's this new heaven, this new Asgard, this new Idavol, and the gods talk about everything that had happened, and they wonder, could have we avoided this? And then they find chess pieces in the grass, and the chess pieces are of Odin and Thor and Frey, and all these beings and these gods that died in Ragnarok. And the last line of the myth is, and the game begins again. So what they do is they set this chessboard with these figures that look like these gods and these beings that took part in Ragnarok, and the whole thing starts all over again. So it's not just a story of destruction, it's a story of rebirth too. And it's in the destruction that takes place doesn't have to happen, because all through the myths, whenever the gods confine some being that they see as a threat, they're repressing something that needs to sort of have its day and say its piece. And so a lot of the time they're talking about the unconscious mind. So, let's get into some of this cast of characters. So, really in Ragnarok, the most prominent character is Loki, I think, head and shoulders above everyone. He's kind of the most controversial. There are groups, there are sort of, chapters, covens, whatever, of people who are Norse, Germanic pagans that celebrate, the old gods and the old traditions. And, what you usually see is that these people have come from Christianity, but they feel like they're chafing under the strict rules of Christianity. So they bring Christianity to this older tradition, and so they treat Loki as a devil, and they refuse to mention his name, and they speak contemptuously about him because he's a trickster god. Well, this is a misunderstanding. And what you see a lot with these pagan groups is that there are people who often came from pretty fundamentalist Christian families, and they wanted to drink and have sex and party and do all this stuff. So they just adopted this new religion, but they didn't change their mindset. So they brought this fundamentalist Christian mindset. So they see Loki as a total devil and a total demon. But trickster gods were really fundamental to, pre-Christian pantheons. And all over the world, there was always a trickster god, and really the trickster was really the one that was most devoted to gaining wisdom and to human evolution and ensuring that people grew and evolved. And what trickster gods do is that they set ego traps. And a way I look at gods and goddesses and these mythological figures is that there's sort of psychological complexes within our minds, individually and collectively. And so, they're part of our operating system. So if you don't see them as, actual divine beings, well, at the very least, they are psychological complexes. They're sort of programs that run in the operating system of your mind. And you're born with them because, especially if you're from the Western world, your ancestors believed in these things and knew about these things. So they're part of your makeup. So in any case, Loki or any trickster god is very concerned for is really devoted to our spiritual evolution and our growth. So as a psychological complex or as a god even, he acts through us. So when we get self-righteous and we get self-absorbed and we get very inflexible and rigid in our belief systems, he sets traps for us. So we basically set traps for ourselves. We set ego traps that we fall into, and we learn a lesson from it. And if we don't learn a lesson from it, we keep falling into the same ego trap, and we keep falling into the same types of ego traps just over the years and continually until we learn a lesson. So that's what Loki does with Ragnarok, because basically the gods they act sort of in juvenile manners and they act irresponsibly, and they they're very self-righteous and they're all about having things their own way because, again, these celestial gods are totally obsessed with purity. So they get stuck in their own egos and they get self-absorbed. So, and really there's this whole, in the myths, there's this whole series of ego traps that Loki sets, but they end up really being blessings to the gods because the gods get their magic weapons, and Asgard gets its wall that protects it, and the things that Loki does produce great results in the end. They end up being beneficial. So really why Loki sort of leads this whole this big Ragnarok event is because he was confined under the earth, and he was basically he had Chinese water torture with a serpent dripping venom into his eyes. So he basically says, that's the last straw. The gods are going to have a reckoning. So what he does is he breaks out of his bonds, and he kind of organizes this whole coalition. So you've got the armies of the underworld, the armies of the dead, and then his children, the Fenris Wolf, and the world serpent, Jormungand, and then the frost giants and the fire beings. So, and why Loki was confined and tied up and, getting this, Chinese water torture with snake venom is because there's this whole story about how there's this god Bald, or Balder, some people call him Balder, and Balder represents the soul, our individual souls, and the soul of the the universe even. So Bald was having all of these nightmares about him dying and the world ending and all these terrible things. So his mother Frigga, who's kind of the mother of the universe, went out and promised, every living thing promised her that they would never harm him. But the one thing she missed was mistletoe. So she never got a promise from mistletoe that wouldn't harm him. So after she got done getting a promise from everything in the universe that it wouldn't harm Balder, or Bald, this god who represents the soul, she told the gods, and they didn't believe her. So she said, yeah, look, and she takes a weapon and she throws it at him, and it bounces off of him, and all the gods start laughing. So then they start throwing spears and axes and swords and huge rocks at him, and everything just bounces off of him or it crumbles, and everyone's having a good time, and they're drinking and getting drunk and acting stupid. And Loki sees this and he's absolutely furious. And in a very literal way, it just looks like Loki's being a killjoy at a party, but really he's angry because the gods are not taking the soul seriously and appreciating it for what it is. So Balder's brother, Hod, and Hod's name means ignorance, is sad that he doesn't know what's going on, because he's blind. So Loki finds out that Balder is vulnerable to mistletoe, so he makes a dart and he puts it in the hand of this blind god Hod, and he tells him to throw it. So this little dart hits Balder and kills him instantly. So Loki runs away for a while. He comes back, and they sort of they take him back, and then sometime later they have a feast, and he starts insulting everyone, and it comes out that he was the one who put Hod up to to killing Balder unwittingly. So then the gods tie him up and they give him the Chinese water torture with the snake venom. So Loki he's angry at the gods for not respecting the soul, and then so a little sidebar, when Bald dies and he leaves Asgard, he's in the underworld. And so, this is a symbol of, our souls leaving, higher spiritual realms and incarnating here on Earth. But anyway, Loki is angry at the gods for not appreciating and respecting the soul. So that's why he causes the death of Balder. And so when he finally breaks out, he's still angry at the gods about this, and he's angry for the torment and the torture that he suffered at their hands. So he brings about Ragnarok, him and his coalition and his two children, the Midgard serpent, Jormungand, and then the Fenris wolf. So Loki leads this whole battle against the gods. And so, like I said, in this battle, there's all of these counterbalancing, forces mutually destroy each other, because it's symbolic of how everything has to be in balance, and you can't have one force without another. So, when you look at these things closer, there's a lot of symbolic meaning. So, for example, on one side you have the army of Valhalla. So these humans who they died honorably in battle, and basically what this means is that it doesn't mean that they died in warfare. It means that they were people who in life they had a strong sense of identity, and they followed their passions, and they lived with their hearts, and they did what they really wanted to do, and they didn't compromise. And even if they weren't successful at doing everything they wanted to do, they went for it, and they died going for it. And the people in the underworld, or hell, the armies of hell. And then, another thing too here is that hell is not a place of torment. It's actually it's the underworld where people go between incarnations, between lives, and they rest and recuperate, and they heal so they can be born again and kind of get life, right the next time, or at least do it better. So in the myths, the people who go to hell, who go to the underworld, are said to be people who died in sickness or who died shameful deaths. So the people in the underworld are not people who did not die in warfare. They're people who didn't go for it in life. They didn't do the things they wanted to do. They were always afraid of, they lived from fear, so instead of following their passions, they said, well, I need to do something my parents would like me to do. I have to make enough money so that they don't, think I'm some kind of a loser, or I have to have a lifestyle that they'll approve of. So they're people who made it to the end of their lives having not gone after what they really wanted to do. So that is what is considered a shameful death, or dying in sickness in these myths. Whereas the people in Valhalla are people who went for it, and they followed their passions. So the people in Valhalla, they didn't literally die in battle. They died sort of figuratively fighting the good fight in their lives. They knew who they were, and they lived as their authentic selves. So these are two opposing forces within the human race. So in this Ragnarok, they mutually destroy each other. Another mutual destruction pair, you have Odin, who is, our higher selves, highest awareness. And then you have the Fenris wolf. So the Fenris wolf symbolizes our aggression, it's our lower selves when our lower selves are not aligned with our higher selves. So in the spiritual community in the New Age, the lower self gets a really bad reputation. And you hear it in the New Age all the time. People are like, oh yeah, the lower self is like totally not spiritual, and they bag on it. But, your lower self is the motor that creates your life. It's all your passions and all your desires, and it's your manifestation machine. But what happens is, if your lower self is not in tune with your soul and with your higher self, it causes chaos because it feels scared because it's not being led. It's like a dog that doesn't have someone, sort of kind of giving it discipline and giving its life structure. It just destroys things and creates chaos. So that's what Fenrir, or the Fenris wolf, symbolizes. So it's our lower self when it's afraid, it feels like it has to fend for itself. So it's aggressive, and it's in fight or flight mode, survival mode, and it causes chaos. So you have two counterbalancing forces here. You've got fight or flight mode, which is Fenrir, the Fenris wolf, and then you have highest awareness, or higher self, so Odin. So they mutually destroy each other in this battle. And then you have Thor on one side and the Midgard serpent, so Jormungand, this giant snake, on the other. So Thor's original name, his ancient Proto-Germanic name, was Thunar. And Thunar means, one of the meanings is Lord of the Divine Mind, so Lord of Higher Consciousness. So Thor is a Scandinavian version of his name, Thunar. So Thor also is a god of life force energy, so chi or prana. And the whole idea is that the more energy we have, the more chi or prana that we have, it elevates our consciousness, and we can use the higher centers of our brain, our higher thinking, and we can tap into intuition. So on the other side of that, you have this giant serpent, this Jormungand. So Jormungand is the among other things, the reptilian brain. So this, again, fight or flight, lower consciousness, survival, baser instincts, violence, aggression, lust, greed, all that stuff. And another thing here too, with this counterbalance, these opposites, Thor being a god of of energy and electromagnetism, this electromagnetic force keeps things separate. So it keeps objects separate. It keeps your body from falling through a chair, when you sit on it. So it allows things to have distinct identities and distinct existences. And so Thor, being this god of electromagnetism, is also a god of boundaries and individual identity. So on the other side of that, Jormungand, the serpent, is like a god of kind of chaos and entropy, where things just sort of start muddling together and decomposing. So these are two forces that always fight each other and counterbalance each other, and one never gets the upper hand over the other. So that's why in Ragnarok they eliminate each other. So then another one you have, for example, is you have Frey, who's the god of fertility, god of the harvest, and you've got Surt. So Surt again is like this fire demon, this Balrog, that sort of personifies the destructive and cleansing force of fire. And so in the battle they end up fighting, and actually Surt, this fire being, ends up overcoming Frey, and Frey dies. And basically when you look at this, it's like nature. Fire, you have wildfires when the nature gets too lush and there's too much underbrush. There's too much growth, so the fire has to come and clean it out so the trees can get bigger and stronger. So when the natural world is left unchecked, the wildfires will always happen to burn out the underbrush. So it's kind of what this is about. Well, it's not kind of, it is what it's about. And so then, another example of this, you have the god Tyr. So Tyr is, a lot of people say Tyr is a god of war, and well, he's not. He's a god of victory, and he's a god of spiritual warfare. So it's really about conquering yourself and conquering your lower nature, because Tyr is, highest intellectual awareness. And, Tyr is, he's sort of like an older warrior, that he's mature and he understands that you don't really want to do battle unless you really have to, because people are going to get hurt, everyone's going to get hurt, and it's destructive. So it's your older warrior, who's like a father and, is mature. And in the myths, Tyr he gives up his right hand, he gives up his sword hand. And this is actually where the whole thing about Jaime Lannister losing his sword hand comes from. It's what it's based on. So Tyr gives up his hand so that the gods can trick and tie up the Fenris wolf. So the Fenris wolf won't let the gods hog tie him unless he has someone put their hand in his mouth, so that if he can't escape, he's gonna basically take someone's hand as payment. So Tyr, being this mature warrior who wants to, avoid battle at all, for the sake of other people, makes this sacrifice. He sacrifices his sword hand. So, a little sidebar here, this Fenris wolf really wasn't a threat to the gods. He actually grew up as a puppy in Asgard, and then he started getting bigger and bigger and stronger, and he had this bottomless appetite. So the gods became afraid and insecure, so they tricked him and they tied him up. And after they did this, he said, I would have been your friend, but since you've deceived me and tied me up, then I'm gonna get my revenge when I get out of here, when I get out of confinement. So anyway, Tyr, who's this mature warrior who's given up his sword hand and his ability to wage war, he and another huge wolf called Garm, kill each other. And Garm is this wolf that's always covered in blood, and basically, Garm is another symbol of the lower self when it feels like it's not aligned to the higher self, and it's not being led by us, by our soul. It's out fending for itself, and it feels like it never has enough energy. So when it's covered in blood, it's like it's always leaking blood because it never has enough energy. And so, these two forces eliminate each other. So there's all this, again, with Ragnarok, there's all these mutual forces eliminating each other. So another really important point here about Ragnarok is that there's a psychological level that all of this is taking place on. And really this myth of Ragnarok is symbolic of. So again, when you see this whole thing with the armies of the underworld, the armies of hell, this is talking about, and then on the other side of the armies of hell, you have the gods, and then the human heroes who have died and gone to Valhalla. What you're dealing with is you have an axis here. So you have hell, the unconscious, and then you have, these armies of gods and heroes of Asgard, which are higher consciousness. So the unconscious is huge. And then, on the rune wheel of the 9 worlds of the world tree, the Asgard and then hell they're on an axis, they're directly across from each other. So, Asgard sits in the northeast and hell is in the southwest. And, basically we as human beings are kind of like icebergs. So 10% of us is conscious. So, 10% of our thoughts and emotions are conscious. We know that we're having them, and we know why we're having them. The rest of us, 90% of us is unconscious. And really the subconscious is it's an overlap zone between the conscious and unconscious. It's a very narrow overlap zone. It's kind of like a Venn diagram where the two circles meet. So most of us, 85 to 90% of our emotional and mental activity is unconscious. So we don't know that we're having it. We don't know why we're having it. The unconscious manifests as our reactions, our automatic reactions. When we're presented with a person and their behaviors, or a situation, or an institution, a philosophy, whatever, we have these unconscious reactions. We just react. We don't have to make ourselves react. We just do it. And that all comes from the unconscious. So all of our reactions, our automatic reactions, our likes, dislikes, prejudices, preferences, you name it. The unconscious is like if you look at our minds as an operating system, the unconscious is all the programs running in the background to support the programs that we use directly. So if you take your laptop, for example, you may be using Photoshop, an internet browser, and an MP3 player. You're directly using those programs, but then in the background, you have more programs that have to run to support the ones that you are using directly. So that's the way our minds work. So that's the way the unconscious is. It's 85, 90% of our thoughts and emotions that are running in the background that we're not aware of. So in this Ragnarok myth, where you have this army of the dead from hell that is marching forth against the gods and the human heroes, what you have here is basically the unconscious has been repressed time and again. So it's all of the things within ourselves that we repress. It's all of the thoughts and emotions that are uncomfortable and that we're denying, that we don't want to think about. We don't want to feel those feelings. We don't want to acknowledge they exist. Now and again, our reactions, which are driven by our unconscious, they get so apparent, and they come up from below the surface, and we're sort of shocked by our own behavior and our own emotions and our own thinking. That's the unconscious. It wants to say its piece, and it wants to have its day. And really, to have good mental and emotional health, we have to let the pressure off the unconscious. We have to get in there and acknowledge what's in there, and we sort of have to let it come out. And so, when you repress emotions, when you repress thoughts and behaviors, eventually you get a mental and emotional breakdown, a psycho-emotional breakdown. The unconscious just can't be stuffed full anymore. It's like when you stuff a closet full of things, and eventually it's overstuffed, and every time you open the door, things just fall out of it. That's the way our minds get. So, and most mental and emotional illness is caused by repression. So, and that's why in the myth, that's why Loki he's leading this army out of hell, this army of the dead. He's he's saying to the gods, which is our higher faculties, he's saying you can't stuff the negative and the uncomfortable and the inconvenient thoughts and emotions and behaviors within you into the closet anymore. You're gonna have to deal with this stuff. So he leads this army forth, and he at Ragnarok, to get to the battlefield, Loki loads up this army of the dead from the underworld, from hell, from our unconscious. He loads it up into this giant ship called the Naglfar, and he's the helmsman for it. And the Naglfar is said to have been made out of the fingernails of the dead. So the fingernails are, it's a part of people that, for one, they're gross. You don't want to be in your house, and you don't want to have like fingernails all over the floor, or your table, or all over the bathroom. They're dirty, they're kind of gross, and then they're a part of the human body that sort of remains after we die, and they keep growing. So the fingernails almost symbolize like our residual emotions and thoughts, and like especially resentments after we're gone, because Chinese medicine, being a practitioner of Chinese medicine, fingernails are said to be outgrowths of the liver, and the liver processes all of our anger and our resentments. So, and that's a big thing about going to the underworld, is you take your resentments are a big thing that makes you have to go there so you can resolve them. So, interesting symbols here. So that's why Loki leads the army of the dead out of hell, and steers this ship made out of the fingernails of the dead. So it's all about, Loki is basically, he's led the gods into an ego trap where they've been repressing and forcing things down. So they repressed the Fenrir, this giant, ferocious, strong wolf, who could have been friends with the gods, who was willing to do it, but they were too afraid and insecure of him to allow that to happen. So they tricked him, they deceived him, and they bound him and they confined him, but he broke out, because you can't stuff the unconscious down and not deal with your uncomfortable emotions and thoughts and behaviors forever. So, and even the world serpent, it was getting big, and so Odin released it out into the ocean. It's like, maybe that could have cooperated and been friends with the gods. So it's just example after example here. So it's really interesting. So, basically, again, Loki leads us into this ego trap. You can't repress yourself forever, or you can have a breakdown. And so, and this happens in our world. When we repress belief systems, they come roaring out. So, and religions have done this time and again, and people have crazy behaviors when they're living under strict repressive religions. Particularly, two of the big three, especially Christianity and Islam. They can just be so purist and, so hardline that, people have reactions and they have, insane behaviors as a reaction to them. So, and then another interesting thing here too is that, part of this coalition that's waging this battle, this Ragnarok battle against Asgard, are the frost giants. So giants in these myths are the forces of expansion and growth. So, but they have to be counterbalanced. When you have too much growth, when you have unlimited growth, that gets pathological. Biologically, you get cancer. It's just endless replication of, these corrupted cells. With people, people who are acting like giants, they're people who don't have boundaries. They're always expanding their sphere of influence onto other people, and they're imposing their beliefs and their ways onto other people. So, for me, I look at both sides of, left-right politics as being this way, because, they both have problems minding their own business. The left feels like that they have a right to perfect the rest of the world because they're much more intelligent and more educated, and they know how things should be. They know how people should live. So it's like they want to coddle people to death so that nothing bad can ever happen to them, but they don't allow other opinions. You're either with them or you're against them. And the same thing on the right. The right feels like it can, instead of using brains, it can use force to perfect the world. Especially with the United States, it's like we try to do it one country at a time, with all the regime change and, invasions and, airstrikes. So, but it's just like the left. It's an example of not someone having this energy, this constantly expanding energy where they can't mind their own business. So that's what, when it talks about the giants, these frost giants, opposing the higher consciousness, the higher consciousness says people need to live their lives and learn their lessons, and you can't impose your way against them. And then the giants are just like, they just want to expand and consume. And that's the thing too with Ragnarok, is the gods start to act like giants. And interestingly too, it's like a lot of the gods are part giant. Like Thor's mother, for example, is a giantess. She's an earth goddess. So, and even the gods of Asgard, a lot of their ancestors are giants in the mythology. So, pretty interesting. And then, the fire beings, from Muspel, the fire world, in the south of the rune wheel. Fire again is this cleansing, it's a destructive force that cleanses the earth for new growth to happen. So, really interesting symbols here. I love this stuff. So, I could go into this stuff forever, but the moral of the story here is that the gods brought this about. They brought about Ragnarok. So, basically, Ragnarok is an ego trap that the gods set for themselves, but Loki is kind of the agent of it. He's like the administrator of it. Ragnarok is like medicine for the gods who've become too self-righteous and too self-absorbed and too wrapped up in their own sense of self-righteousness. They think they're always right and everyone else is always wrong. So Loki helps them set this trap for themselves so that they can learn from it. So that's why after Ragnarok, the surviving gods, they ask each other, could we have avoided this? And, the story is absolutely yes. And so that brings us back to modern times, we can avoid tragic events that, like I've said, the astrology shows us that we have plenty of potential for, from now and into the beginning of 2020 and even beyond. So, we have to learn from this myth that we need to step back and we need to see things from the perspective of other people. And we need to back off the self-righteousness, and just back off the blind aggression against people who don't agree with us, because if we insist on doing this, we're not going to get our smug victories that we're looking for. We're all going to lose together, just like these armies in Ragnarok that all destroy each other. So, and to do this, we need to have a better sense of identity. We need to have more self-esteem. We need to have self-knowledge so that we can really live our lives authentically and not just, mindlessly join some cause that we're going to support all the way to our destruction. So, to believe in yourself, to have real self-esteem, you need to know who you are, and that takes some time and that takes some work. What happens is that self-esteem and ego are two sides of the same coin. So when we don't have genuine self-esteem, we get egotistical. And when we, all these things are related. So when we have low self-esteem, it's because we don't know who we are. We lack a sense of self. So, what happens is we blindly pledge ourselves to a cause, to someone who's leading a cause, someone who doesn't have our best interests at heart. So we need to get out of this. We need to know ourselves and think better of ourselves. When we do that, we live from our hearts and we live authentically. We make the right decisions. So that's where we're at as a world right now. We need to take a step back and be authentic. When we do this, we don't have to compete with each other so much. We don't have to fight each other about who's right, about whose side is right and whose side is wrong. Because we discover that we're all pretty unique and we all have something to contribute. And that's the essence of this Age of Aquarius that we're starting. Pisces, again, it's all about there's only two sides. Choose a side, and whatever side that I pick or that you pick is the right side, and the other side is always wrong, and they're always stupid, and they're always evil. That mindset is leading us to tragic events towards a Ragnarok. So, going back to this, the political thing, to the Iran thing, if we keep thinking we're right and that the other side is evil and totally stupid and wrong, then conflict is inevitable and we're all going to lose together. Nobody's going to win, especially with another war. We're going to be, as Americans, we'll be financially destroyed, and there'll be another mess in the Middle East, just like Afghanistan, like Iraq. So, and it's interesting that I'm making this video on a Tuesday, because Tuesday is named for the god Tyr. The Anglo-Saxons who settled in England called Tyr Tew. So Tyr, the Scandinavian version, is T-I-R. Tew is T-I-W. And that's who Tuesday is named after. So, interesting day to make this video. So, one thing to take away is, be that mature, responsible warrior and see things from the perspective of the people who you may otherwise just write off as enemies and write off as threats. Because really, you have much more in common with them than you realize. So, thanks for tuning in today, and good luck out there. And, try not to take yourself so seriously. I have to work at this, and we all have to. So, check out my website. It's thecosmicalchemist.com. I'll put that address into the comments section. You can also book Vedic astrology readings with me and rune readings. And I also have Qigong videos on sale for download. You can use the coupon code SUMMER to get 25% off. And I'll put that in the comments section as well. So again, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one.